Hello everyone. Welcome to Realist Quill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Let me start by saying I never wanted to work mall security. The polyester uniform, the power-tripping supervisors, the endless circles around the same stores while bored teenagers mock you behind your back. But after getting laid off from my IT job and finding my bank account dwindling to dangerous levels, I didn't exactly have options. Westfield Mall wasn't the worst place to work. Built in the early 90s, it had somehow survived the retail apocalypse that claimed so many other shopping centers across America. It wasn't thriving by any means. About a third of the storefronts were empty, covered with those exciting new store coming soon signs that had been there since 2019. But it had enough anchor stores and specialty shops to keep a steady stream of shoppers flowing through its two levels. I was hired as the night security guard, working from 11. The mall closed at 9, but there was always cleaning staff and occasional overnight maintenance, until around midnight. After that it was just me, the empty corridors and the weirdly specific noises that buildings make when they're settling. Night shift's a breeze, my supervisor Dennis told me during training. Walk the perimeter once an hour, check the doors and watch the cameras. Rest of the time you can read or whatever. Just stay awake. He handed me a ring of about 30 keys. And don't lose these, or we're both screwed. The security office was tucked away in the basement level, next to the food court. It was basically a glorified closet, with 4 monitors showing grainy feeds from the mall's security cameras. The system was ancient, recordings stored on actual DVDs instead of a digital server. The chair squeaked every time I moved and the mini fridge hummed so loudly I could hear it even with headphones on. My first few weeks were exactly as boring as expected. I'd walk my rounds, check the doors, come back to my little office, and watch YouTube videos, or read until it was time to do it again. Sometimes I'd hear strange sounds scraping in the ventilation ducts, thumps from the roof, a distant metallic pinging that seemed to move around, but Dennis had warned me about this. Old buildings talk, he said. You'll get used to it. I was settling into the routine when I noticed something strange on camera 12. This particular camera covered the northwestern corridor on the upper level, where a row of clothing boutiques lined one side and a railing overlooking the food court lined the other. At exactly 3:17 a.m., every night there was a slight flicker on the feed lasting about 3 seconds. Just a momentary distortion, like someone had walked past the camera, except no one was there. I mentioned it to Dennis during our shift change. Probably just a power fluctuation, he said, not looking up from his phone. These cameras are older than you are. That made sense. The mall's electrical system was a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged solutions. Half the emergency exit signs flickered constantly, and the automated announcements sometimes played at random in the middle of the night. But then I noticed another pattern. Every night, at 3:19 a.m., 2 minutes after the camera 12 flicker, camera 8 would show the same momentary distortion. Camera 8 was positioned at the far end of the mall, covering the entrance to the service corridors. And then at 3:21 a.m., camera 15 at the main entrance would do the same thing. It was like something was moving through the mall, triggering each camera in sequence. Something invisible. I decided to investigate. On my next shift, I positioned myself near camera 12 at 3:15 a.m. The corridor was silent and still, illuminated only by the dim security lights that cast long shadows across the polished floor. The storefronts were dark, mannequins standing like sentinels in the gloom. 3:17 a.m. came and went. Nothing happened. No flicker, no distortion, no movement. Just the soft hum of the climate control system and my own breathing. I checked the monitor when I returned to the office. Sure enough, camera 12 had flickered at exactly 3:17 a.m., camera 8 at 3:19 a.m., and camera 15 at 3:21 a.m. But I had been standing right there at camera 12 and I'd seen nothing. This continued for weeks. Every night, the same pattern, the same timing. I tried standing at different cameras, even attempted to follow the path of whatever was causing the distortions. but I never saw anything with my own eyes. Then came the first incident with the mannequin. I was making my 2 a.m. round when I noticed something off about the display window at Trendsetters, one of the clothing boutiques on the upper level. The mannequins, there were 3 of them, seemed different somehow. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what had changed. Then it hit me, they were in different positions than they had been during my midnight round. Not dramatically different, just adjusted. One had its arm raised slightly higher than before. Another had turned about 15 degrees to the left. The third, previously facing forward, was now angled toward the door. I dismissed it initially. Maybe the cleaning crew had bumped into the display. Or maybe I was just misremembering their positions. It was the middle of the night after all, and my brain wasn't exactly firing on all cylinders. But the next night, it happened again. Same store, same mannequins, different positions. Small adjustments, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. And I was definitely paying attention now. I checked with the cleaning supervisor, a tired-looking woman named Maria, who'd been working at the mall since it opened. "We don't touch the displays," she said firmly. "Store managers would have our heads." I mentioned it to Dennis, who just laughed. "Let me guess you think the mannequins are moving at night?" He clapped me on the shoulder. "Oldest security guard freak out in the book, my friend. Your eyes play tricks on you during those late hours." Maybe he was right. Maybe it was all in my head. Then I checked the security footage. I started going through the recordings systematically, focusing on the time between my rounds, and that's when I saw it, at 3:23 a.m. Exactly 2 minutes after the flicker on camera 15. The feed from camera 7, which covered Trendsetter's storefront, would freeze for precisely 10 seconds. When it resumed, the mannequins were in their new positions. I nearly fell out of my chair. This wasn't my imagination. This was happening. Something was moving through the mall each night, triggering camera distortions as it went, and then rearranging mannequins. It didn't make any sense. If someone was breaking in, why would they just move mannequins a few inches and then leave? Why not steal something? And how were they avoiding being seen on camera? The timing was too precise, too consistent for it to be a technical glitch. I decided to set a trap. On my next shift, I brought my own camera, a decent digital SLR I'd splurged on during happier financial times. I set it up on a tripod facing Trendsetters, set to take photos at 10-second intervals starting at 3:20 a.m. The next morning, I scrolled through the photos with shaking hands. Most showed exactly what you'd expect: an empty, dimly lit mall corridor with mannequins visible in the store window. But in the photo taken at exactly 3:23 a.m., there was something, a blurry figure, standing in front of the display window. The image was distorted, like the figure was vibrating at high speed. I couldn't make out any features, just a vaguely humanoid shape, taller than it should be, with limbs that seemed too long and bent at unnatural angles. I nearly dropped my camera. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I stared at the image. The next photo, taken 10 seconds later, showed an empty corridor again, but the mannequins had shifted positions. I called in sick the next night, and the night after that. Dennis left increasingly annoyed voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to go back. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was dealing with. I spent those days researching the mall's history, digging through local news archives and online forums. Westfield Mall had opened in 1992, with the usual fanfare ribbon-cutting ceremony, local politicians making speeches, special sales at all the stores. Nothing unusual there. But then I found a small article from 1993. During the mall's construction, a worker had gone missing. Walter Simmons, 34, vanished during the final phase of construction. His car was still in the parking lot, his tools still at his workstation, but Walter himself was nowhere to be found. The police investigation turned up nothing. Walter had simply disappeared. The article mentioned that Walter had been working on the electrical systems, specifically the security camera wiring. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was this connected? Was Walter somehow still in the mall, moving through the corridors at night? It sounded insane, but no more insane than what I'd been witnessing. I couldn't avoid work forever. After 4 days, I returned to the night shift, armed with my camera and a new determination to uncover the truth. I set up multiple cameras this time, positioned throughout the mall to capture different angles. That night, at 3:15 a.m., I stationed myself in the security office, eyes glued to the monitors. Right on schedule, camera 12 flickered at 3:17 a.m., then camera 8 at 3:19 a.m., camera 15 at 3:21 a.m. I waited for camera 7 to freeze, indicating that the whatever it was had reached trendsetters. But instead, at 3:22 a.m., I heard something new, a sound coming from the corridor outside the security office, a scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. The pattern had changed. Whatever was out there was coming here, to the security office. The sound grew louder, closer. I could hear something else now too, a faint electrical buzzing, like the hum of an old fluorescent light, but higher pitched, more intense. The door handle began to turn slowly. I didn't think, I reacted. I dove beneath the desk, curling into a ball, trying to make myself as small as possible. The door creaked open. The buzzing sound filled the room, painful in its intensity. The air felt charged, like just before a lightning strike. Through a gap in the desk, I could see a distortion in the air, a rippling, vibrating form that seemed to bend the light around it. It moved jerkily into the room, each motion unnatural and wrong, like a video being played at the wrong speed. Then the monitors went crazy, flashing, cycling through camera feeds so quickly that the images blurred together. In that strobing light, I caught glimpses of the thing standing in the doorway, a humanoid figure, impossibly tall with limbs that seemed to bend in multiple places. Its head was oddly shaped, elongated, and where its face should have been was just static. Visual noise like an analog TV tuned to a dead channel. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The thing tilted its head, or what passed for its head, as if listening. Then it raised one distorted limb toward the bank of monitors. The screens went black simultaneously, and then a sound came from the thing. A voice, but wrong, distorted and layered, like multiple people speaking at once, their words slightly out of sync. I see you watching. Always watching. Always watching. The voice seemed to come not from the figure, but from the monitors themselves, though they remained dark. Then slowly, one by one, they flickered back to life. But now each showed the same image, the inside of the security office, from multiple angles, me huddled under the desk, and the figure standing in the doorway. It was seeing itself on the monitors, a feedback loop of its own existence. Trapped in the system, watching, being watched. Understanding dawned on me then, horrible and clear. This thing, this entity, it wasn't Walter Simmons, at least not entirely. It was something that had happened to him, something that had merged him with the security system he'd been installing when he disappeared. Help me. The words were clearer now, more desperate. The figure took a jerky step toward me, and I pressed myself harder against the wall. But it wasn't approaching me. It was moving toward the ancient DVD recorder that stored all the security footage. With movements that seemed to skip frames, like a stuttering video, it placed its distorted hand on the machine. The buzzing grew louder, and the recorder's lights began flashing wildly. Smoke curled from its vents. Release me. I understood what it wanted. Somehow, Walter, or what remained of him, had become trapped in the mall's outdated security system. For 30 years he'd been aware, watching, unable to escape or fully manifest, except during those brief moments when he could affect the cameras. Please. My hand hovered over the power button on the DVD recorder. If I shut it down, if I severed the connection to the cameras, what would happen to Walter? Would he be released, or would he cease to exist entirely? But if I did nothing, he would remain trapped, conscious, but imprisoned, for as long as the system continued to function. That wasn't a fate I could leave anyone to endure. I pressed the button. The recorder powered down with a whine. The monitors went black. The figure before me convulsed, its form destabilizing further. The buzzing reached a painful crescendo, and then, silence, complete and absolute. When I finally worked up the courage to emerge from under the desk, the room was empty. The air no longer felt charged. The monitors remained dark. I quit the next day. Dennis didn't even seem surprised. Apparently, the night security position had an unusually high turnover rate. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged. Some people aren't cut out for the night shift, he said. Being alone with your thoughts in an empty mall can do strange things to your mind. I didn't tell him what had happened. What would be the point? He wouldn't believe me. No one would. But I know what I saw. The mall got a new security system installed the following month. State-of-the-art, fully digital. No more DVDs, no more ancient wiring. The old system was torn out completely. I drove by Westfield a few weeks after that, late at night, and parked across the street. The mall stood silent and dark, its vast parking lot empty under the glow of streetlights. I don't know what I expected to see. Maybe some sign that Walter was still there, still trapped, or maybe some indication that he had finally been freed. But there was nothing, just an ordinary mall, waiting for morning. I still think about Walter sometimes, about those distorted words trapped in the system, watching being watched. I wonder if that's what happened to him. If somehow during the installation of that first primitive security system, his consciousness had become entangled with the electronics, neither fully alive nor fully dead, existing in a liminal space between reality and something else. And sometimes, when I walk through a mall and pass those ubiquitous security cameras, I find myself wondering, are they just watching, or is something watching through them? Something trapped, desperate, trying to reach out the only way it can. If you've ever noticed a security camera flicker as you walk past, or a mannequin that seems to have moved between visits to a store, maybe think twice before dismissing it. In places like shopping malls, where so many lives intersect briefly before moving on, sometimes things or people get left behind. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that sometimes the things we build to keep us safe become prisons for others. Hey there, fellow night owls and lovers of the strange. If this tale from the night shift at Westfield Mall sent shivers down your spine, consider subscribing to Realist Quill for more encounters with the unexplained. Your support keeps these stories flowing, and trust me, I've got plenty more where this came from. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know what might be watching back. The first thing you need to know about me is that I never planned on working at a department store. Look, I had dreams, okay? Big ones. I was going to be a fashion designer, create my own line, maybe even see my clothes on runways in Paris or Milan. Instead, I ended up dressing mannequins at Hartwick's department store in the saddest mall in America. Westlake Shopping Center was built in the mid-90s boom, back when malls were still the crown jewels of suburban retail. By the time I started working there in 2019, it was hanging on by its fingernails. 2 of the 4 anchor stores had closed, leaving vast, empty spaces like missing teeth in a decaying smile. The fountain in the central courtyard had been turned off for maintenance 3 years earlier and never restarted. Half the food court was vacant, and the other half was an assortment of mediocre chain restaurants and a single stubbornly persistent Orange Juliet. But Hartwick's remained, a family-owned department store that had somehow weathered the retail apocalypse. Maybe it was their loyal local customer base. Maybe it was the fact that they owned their space outright. Or maybe it was just pure, stubborn determination. Whatever the reason, they kept their doors open while everything around them crumbled. I took the job because I needed money. My student loans from fashion school weren't going to pay themselves. And it turns out that BA in fashion design doesn't automatically translate to gainful employment in a town like Westlake. Hardwick's was hiring, and at least it was adjacent to my field. My title was Visual Merchandising Assistant, which sounds a lot fancier than what I actually did. Dress mannequins, arrange displays, and occasionally help customers when the sales floor was short-staffed. The pay was decent, the hours were regular, and my boss, Marlene, mostly left me alone to do my thing. It wasn't my dream job, but it was far from the worst gig in the world, except for the mannequins. God, I hated those mannequins. Hardwick's had an extensive collection, some dating back to the store's opening in the 1950s. They weren't the sleek, featureless forms you see in modern stores. These were old-school mannequins with detailed faces, painted eyes, and articulated fingers. Some had wigs, while others had molded plastic hair. They were stored in what we called the mannequin darknet, a large, poorly lit room in the basement of the store. Rows upon rows of naked plastic people standing at attention or disassembled into parts on metal shelves. You'll get used to them, Marlene assured me on my first day when she caught me staring uncomfortably at a female mannequin with unnervingly realistic eyes. They're just tools of the trade. She was wrong. I never got used to them. Every time I went down to the mannequin department, I felt like I was being watched. I'd hear soft scraping sounds when I turned my back, only to spin around and find nothing but still, silent figures. There was one mannequin in particular that I hated more than the other. We called her Rebecca, though I don't know who started that or why. She was one of the oldest in the collection, a female form with a delicate face, high cheekbones, and a slight, enigmatic smile. Her eyes were painted a pale blue that somehow seemed to catch the light no matter what angle you viewed her from. Rebecca's our prima donna, Marlene told me. She always gets the best outfits. It was true. Rebecca was always positioned in the main window display, modeling the most expensive items. Marlene was weirdly protective of her too. Once I suggested we rotate in some of the newer mannequins for the main window, and you'd have thought I'd proposed setting fire to the merchant. Rebecca stays in the window, she said firmly. It's tradition. Tradition. That word got thrown around a lot at Hardwick's. Tradition is why we still used paper sales tags instead of electronic ones. Tradition is why the store closed on Sundays despite the lost revenue. Tradition is why Rebecca always got the window, and why no one ever questioned the weirdly specific rules about handling the mannequins. Those rules were the first thing Marlene had taught me. Never leave a mannequin face down. Always replace limbs in the exact spot you found them. Never ever leave a mannequin unfinished overnight. If you start dressing one, you finish it before you leave. And most importantly, always return Rebecca to her designated spot in the mannequin department when she wasn't in use. Bad things happen when these rules aren't followed, Marlene warned. When I asked what kind of bad things, she just smiled tightly and said, "The kind we don't need to experience again." I figured it was just retail superstition. Every workplace has its quirks and irrational beliefs. At my college job at a cafe, nobody would use the purple mug because someone had once broken their hand while holding it. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We make up stories to explain coincidences. So I followed the rules, but I didn't take them too seriously. Until the night I broke them. It was a Friday, and we were preparing for a big weekend sale. I'd been tasked with creating a new display for the juniors section, featuring the spring collection that had just arrived. Marlene had left early for a doctor's appointment, and I was working alone. I went down to the mannequin department to select the forms I needed. The basement was quiet, the overhead fluorescents humming softly as I moved between the rows of silent figures. I found most of what I needed easily. 2 female forms for dresses, a male for the new line of graphic tees, but I wanted something special for the centerpiece. My eyes landed on Rebecca. standing in her designated spot near the back wall. She wasn't scheduled for use. The main window display wouldn't be changed until next week. But she was perfect. The right height, the right build. And that face would sell clothes. I knew Marlene would be furious. Rebecca was only ever used for the main window, never for department displays. But Marlene wasn't here, and what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. I'd have Rebecca back in her spot by Monday morning. No one would ever know. I wheeled her upstairs on a dolly, along with the other mannequins, and got to work. The display was coming together beautifully. I dressed the others first. Casual wear for the males, summery dresses for the females. Before turning my attention to Rebecca, I'd picked out a stunning maxi dress for her, vibrant blue with a geometric pattern that would catch the eye from across the store. I slipped it carefully over her head, adjusted the drape of the fabric, and stepped back to admire the effect. It was perfect. The blue of the dress made her eyes seem to glow. I added a wide-brimmed hat and a statement necklace, and she was transformed from a creepy old mannequin into the epitome of spring fashion. By the time I finished the entire display, it was well past closing time. The store was empty except for the night security guard, who was making his rounds. I was exhausted, and still had to clean up the mess of pins, hangers, and discarded accessories. That's when my phone rang. It was my roommate, in a pen. She'd locked herself out of our apartment and needed me to come home right away. I looked at the scattered mess around me, then at my watch. It was nearly 10 p.m. I'll clean up tomorrow, I decided. I'll come in early. I packed up my personal belongings and headed for the exit. As I passed the display I'd created, I felt a twinge of unease. Rebecca seemed to be staring at me, that slight smile now looking more like a knowing smirk. I was halfway to the door when I remembered one of Marlene's rules. Never leave a mannequin unfinished over. But the mannequins were finished. They were fully dressed and positioned. What was unfinished was the workspace around them, not the mannequins themselves. Besides, I reasoned, these were just superstitions. Nothing bad would happen if I left some mess until morning. I hurried out, nodding to the security guard as I passed. "All done for the night?" he asked. "Yep, all set," I lied. "See you tomorrow." I drove home, helped my roommate get inside, and promptly forgot about work concerns as we ordered pizza and binged a new show on Netflix. It wasn't until I was falling asleep that a vague sense of unease crept over me. A feeling that I'd forgotten something important, but exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. The next morning, I woke early as planned and headed to the store. I wanted to clean up before the Saturday rush began, and definitely before Marlene arrived to inspect my work. The mall was quiet, most stores not yet open. Hartwick's main entrance wouldn't open to customers for another hour, but employees could enter through the staff door in the back. The security guard, a different one from the night before, nodded at me as I badged in. "Morning," he said, then hesitated. "Everything okay with your display?" "Johnson said he heard some noise from the juniors section last night after you left." "Noise?" I frowned. "What kind of noise?" He shrugged. "Probably just the building settling. Old places make weird sounds." I hurried up to the juniors department, eager to clean up the mess I'd left. But when I rounded the corner and the display came into view, I stopped cold. Everything was different. The male mannequin, which I'd positioned in the center of the group, was now off to the side. The two female forms I'd dressed in summer dresses were rearranged, their poses changed, and Rebecca was now in the center, her blue maxi dress exchanged for a red cocktail dress I'd never seen before. I stood there stunned. Had Marlene come in early and redone everything? But why would she do that without telling me? And where had that red dress come from? It wasn't part of our spring collection. As I approached the display, I noticed something else. The mess I'd left, the pins, hangers, and accessories was gone. The area was spotless, everything put away neatly. Even the tools I'd left on the counter were arranged in a perfect line, smallest to largest. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been here after I left. Someone had completely redone my work. I pulled out my phone and called Marlene. "Hey, did you come in last night or early this morning?" I asked when she answered. "No. Why would I?" She sounded groggy, like I'd woken her up. "Someone redid the juniors display, changed everything." There was a long pause. "What do you mean, changed everything?" I described the differences. The rearranged mannequins, the mysterious red dress, the cleaned workspace. Another pause, longer this time. "Which mannequins did you use?" Her voice had taken on a strange quality, tight and controlled, the standard ones from Section C. And Rebecca. I heard a sharp intake of breath. "You used Rebecca? For a department display?" "Yes, but did you put her back before you left?" "No, I was going to do that Monday morning. I didn't think it would be a big deal if—" "I'm coming in," Marlene cut me off abruptly. "Don't touch anything. Don't move anything. Just wait for me." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there, phone still in hand, staring at the altered display. The mannequins stared back, their fixed expressions now seeming smug, as if they were in on a joke. I didn't understand. The security guard's words came back to me. "Johnson said he heard some noise from the junior section last night, after you left." "What kind of noise?" I approached the display cautiously, examining each mannequin carefully. The male form was unchanged except for its position. The two females were still wearing the same dresses I'd put them in, though their poses were different. But Rebecca was completely transformed. Not only was she wearing a dress that wasn't ours, but her face seemed different somehow. More defined, more alive. Her painted smile appeared wider, her blue eyes more vibrant. I reached out to touch the red fabric of her dress. It was soft and expensive, real silk from the feel of it. We didn't carry anything like this. Where had it come from? As my fingers brushed the material, I could have sworn I felt the mannequin tremble slightly. I jerked my hand back, heart racing. That was impossible. Mannequins don't move. They don't change their own clothes. They don't clean up messes. Except that's exactly what seemed to have happened. I was still standing there trying to make sense of it all, when Marlene arrived. She took one look at the display and went pale. "Oh, God," she whispered. "It's happening again." "What's happening again?" I demanded. "Marlene, what the hell is going on?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked slowly around the display, her eyes never leaving Rebecca. When she completed her circuit, she turned to me with a grim expression. "We need to get her back downstairs now." Together, we carefully removed Rebecca from the display, taking off the red dress and leaving her in her underwear form. I noticed Marlene handling the dress with extreme caution, using only her fingertips, as if it might contaminate her. "What about the others?" I asked, gesturing to the remaining mannequins. "Leave them," she said. "They're not the problem." We loaded Rebecca onto a dolly and took her to the elevator. As the doors closed behind us, I finally lost patience. "Marlene, you need to tell me what's happening. Why are we treating a mannequin like it's a bomb about to go off?" She sighed heavily, her eyes fixed on Rebecca's serene face. "Because, in a way, she is," she said quietly. "Rebecca isn't just a mannequin. She's something else." The elevator doors opened onto the basement, and we wheeled Rebecca through the dimly lit corridor toward the mannequin department. Marlene continued speaking as we walked. The original owner of Hartwick's, Edward Hartwick, had a daughter named Rebecca. She was beautiful, talented, the apple of his eye. She worked in the store from the time she was a teenager, doing everything from selling to designing displays. She had a gift for visual merchandising, an eye for beauty and arrangement that was almost supernatural. We entered the mannequin department, the silent forms looming around us in the half-light. Marlene led the way to Rebecca's designated spot at the back. In 1957, Rebecca was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. The doctors gave her months to live. Edward was devastated. He couldn't bear the thought of losing his daughter, of her beauty and talent being lost to the world. We positioned Rebecca in her spot, making sure she was standing straight and properly balanced. Edward was a man of unusual interest. He'd traveled extensively in his youth, studied with experts in fields most people would consider fringe or even occult. He believed there was a way to preserve Rebecca's essence, to keep her alive in some form. Marlene stepped back, examining Rebecca critically, making minute adjustments to her positioning. The story goes that he performed some kind of ritual, something he'd learned during his travels in Eastern Europe. No one knows the details. He never shared them, not even with his wife. But the night Rebecca died, Edward spent hours alone with her body in the basement of the store. I felt a chill run through me, goosebumps rising on my arms despite the warmth of the basement. The next morning, Edward unveiled a new mannequin for the store's main window. A beautiful female form with delicate features, high cheekbones, and pale blue eyes. "Rebecca," I whispered. Marlene nodded solemnly. The mannequin was an instant success. Sales in the window display doubled. Then customers were drawn to whatever Rebecca was modeling, often buying entire outfits rather than single pieces. Edward insisted that Rebecca be treated with the utmost respect. Certain rules had to be followed, certain traditions maintained. "The rules you taught me," I said. "Yeah, they were passed down from Edward to his son, then to me when I became manager. We follow them because when we don't, things happen." "What kinds of things?" Marlene hesitated, then said, "The last time someone broke the rules was about 15 years ago. A new employee, like you, didn't take them seriously. He left Rebecca unfinished overnight, half-dressed, arms not properly positioned. The next morning, 3 mannequins were found arranged around his car in the parking lot. No one admitted to moving them. The security cameras showed nothing." I thought of the rearranged display, the mysterious red dress, the cleaned workspace. "So, you're saying Rebecca is, what? Possessed? Haunted?" "I'm saying that whatever Edward Hartwick did that night, it worked, at least partially. Something of his daughter remains in this form. It's limited, contained, as long as the rules are followed. Break them, and Rebecca wakes up." We both stood staring at the mannequin, its slight smile seeming more pronounced in the dim light of the basement. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We apologize," Marlene said simply, "and we promise to follow the rules from now on." Before I could ask if she was serious, Marlene turned to face Rebecca directly. "We apologize for the disrespect shown to you," she said clearly. "It won't happen again. You have my word." She nudged me, and I stammered out a similar apology, feeling utterly ridiculous, talking to a mannequin. But beneath the absurdity was a current of genuine fear, because part of me, a growing part, was starting to believe Marlene's story. "There's one more thing we need to do," Marlene said when we'd finished our apologies. She pulled a small box from her pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate silver bracelet. This was Rebecca's, the real Rebecca's. Edward made sure it was preserved, and it's part of the tradition. After an incident, we offer it as a peace gesture. She carefully fastened the bracelet around the mannequin's wrist. "There," she said, stepping back. "Now we wait." "Wait for what?" "For a sign that she's accepted our apology." I wanted to scoff at the idea, but after what I'd witnessed, I found I couldn't dismiss it so easily. So we stood there in silence, waiting. After several minutes, I was about to suggest we leave, when a soft sound caught my attention, a faint tinkling, like tiny bells. The bracelet on Rebecca's wrist was vibrating slightly, the silver catching the light as it moved. "Thank you, Rebecca," Marlene said softly. "We'll see you Monday, for the window change." She turned and headed for the exit. I followed, unable to shake the feeling that eyes were watching me as I walked away. Over the next few weeks, I followed Marlene's rules to the letter. Rebecca remained in her spot in the mannequin department when not in use, and was only ever used for the main window display. I never left any mannequin unfinished, never laid one face down, always returned limbs to their exact spots. The incident wasn't mentioned again, though sometimes I'd catch Marlene watching me as I worked with the mannequins, her expression unwritten. I wanted to ask her more about Rebecca, about Edward Hartwick and his mysterious ritual. But something held me back. Maybe it was fear that knowing more would somehow make it more real. Then came the day of the anniversary sale, our biggest event of the year. The store was chaos, customers everywhere, staff running ragged trying to keep up. I was called away from my regular duties to help on the sales floor, leaving a half-finished display in the menswear department. It wasn't until hours later, as we were preparing to close, that I remembered the unfinished mannequin. I hurried back to menswear, only to find the display complete. The mannequin was fully dressed, the accessories arranged perfectly, the workspace clean. I stood there, staring. I knew I hadn't finished it. None of the other staff would have had time during the rush. That evening, as I was leaving, I made a detour to the mannequin department. Rebecca stood in her usual spot, serene and still. I approached her cautiously, feeling foolish yet compelled. "Was that you?" I asked softly. "Did you help me today?" There was no response, of course. Just the silence of the basement and the blank stares of dozens of mannequins. But as I turned to leave, I could have sworn I heard a faint tinkling sound, like a delicate silver bracelet moving on a plastic wrist. I've been at Hartwick's for 3 years now. The mall around us continues to decay. More stores closing, fewer customers every month. There are rumors that the whole place will be demolished soon to make way for an outdoor shopping center. But Hartwick's remains stubborn and anachronistic, a store out of time. Marlene retired last year. I was promoted to visual merchandising manager in her place. Before she left, she took me aside and pressed a small key into my hand. "This is for the cabinet in your office," she said. "The bottom drawer. Edward Hartwick's journal is in there. Read it when you're ready." I haven't opened that drawer yet. Part of me isn't sure I want to know the details of what Edward did that night in 1957. But I follow the rules. I respect the traditions, and sometimes when I'm alone in the store after hours, I talk to Rebecca. I tell her about my day, about my frustrations with corporate policies, about my dreams of design that never quite died. I don't know if she listens or understands, but sometimes walking through the quiet store late at night, I'll find a sketch pad left open on a counter, a pencil beside it, and on the page, a design for a dress I'd only imagined, rendered with an expert hand. I know it sounds crazy. Maybe it is. Maybe the stress of retail management and the long hours in an ancient department store have finally gotten to me. Or maybe, just maybe, Rebecca is still here, still creating, still finding ways to express her beauty and talent despite the limitations of her existence. All I know for sure is that when I create a window display with Rebecca as its centerpiece, it's always perfect. The clothes sell themselves. Customers stop and stare, drawn by something they can't quite identify. And sometimes, if you look at just the right moment, you might catch a glimpse of something in those painted blue eyes, a flash of awareness, a hint of the woman who once was. So if you're ever in our dying mall, stop by Hartwick's, check out the window display, say hello to Rebecca. She might not answer, at least not in words, but pay attention to the feeling that comes over you, that sense of being in the presence of something extraordinary, something that exists in the liminal space between life and art, presence and absence. Just don't break the rule. Rebecca doesn't like that. And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens when Rebecca isn't happy. If you've enjoyed this journey into the uncanny world of Hartwick's department store, hit that subscribe button for realist. Your support means everything to me, and it helps me bring more spine-tingling tales from ordinary places with extraordinary secrets. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like a mannequin was watching you. You might not be imagining things after all. I've worked food service most of my adult life, and I'm here to tell you that there's a hierarchy. At the top, you've got your fine dining establishments with actual chefs and sommeliers and tips that could pay your rent. Below that are the casual dining chains, the bars with decent pub grub, the cafes with their fancy latte art. And at the very bottom, the absolute lowest rung on the food service ladder, is the shopping mall food court. Trust me, I know. I spent 3 years serving orange chicken and fried rice at Waka This Way in the Pinwood Mall food court. It wasn't my life's ambition, obviously. I was trying to save money for culinary school, which is ironic considering how thoroughly the job destroyed my love of cooking. Pinwood Mall was one of those mid-tier suburban shopping centers built in the late 80s that had seen better days. Not quite dead, but definitely on life support. The big department stores were still hanging on, and there was enough foot traffic to keep the smaller shops afloat. But you could feel the decline. Empty storefronts plastered with coming soon signs that had been there for years. Chipped tiles in the main concourse. Water stains on the ceiling from leaks that were fixed with the bare minimum effort. The food court was a perfect microcosm of the mall itself, faded, tired, but stubbornly persistent. We had the standard lineup: a pizza place, a burger joint, a sandwich shop, a cookie stand, and my employer, Walk This Way, serving authentic Chinese food that would make any actual Chinese person recoil in horror. Most of my coworkers were high school kids working their first jobs, college students picking up extra cash, or middle-aged folks who had fallen on hard times. Then there was Marcus, our manager, who had been running Walk This Way for 15 years and took his job with the grave seriousness of a heart surgeon. The mall is an ecosystem, Marcus liked to say during our orientation, and the food court is its beating heart. People come here to refuel, to socialize, to rest. We're not just feeding their bodies, we're feeding their shopping experience. It was the kind of corporate bullshit that made me want to gag, but I smiled and nodded because I needed the job. And honestly, for the first few months, it wasn't that bad. The work was mindless: scoop rice, add protein, ladle sauce, repeat. But my coworkers were decent, and the employee discount meant I could eat for free at any food court restaurant. The hours were flexible enough to accommodate my community college schedule. And the pay was, well, it was minimum wage, but what else do you expect from a mall food court? The problems started about 6 months in, when I began working the closing shift. Pinwood Mall closed at 9 p.m. on weeknights, 10 p.m. on weekends. The food court vendors were expected to stay open until 30 minutes before mall closing, then spend about an hour cleaning up. This meant I was often leaving well after the mall had officially closed, when the corridors were empty except for the occasional security guard making rounds. The first strange thing I noticed was the smell. During business hours, the food court was a cacophony of competing aromas: pizza, burgers, cinnamon pretzels, our own cloying sweet and sour sauce. But after closing, once all the fryers were turned off and the grills cooled down, there was something else. A subtle but persistent odor that reminded me of meat left too long in a warm car. Not quite rotten, but definitely off. I mentioned it to Marcus one night as we were closing up. "Do you smell that?" I asked, wrinkling my nose. Marcus paused in the middle of counting the register, his expression briefly flickering before smoothing out again. "Smell what?" "That weird smell, like old meat or something." "Probably just the grease traps," he said dismissively. "Mall maintenance is supposed to clean them regularly, but you know how it is." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. Grease traps have a distinctive odor. This was something different. Something that seemed to come and go stronger in some parts of the food court than others. The second strange thing was the noises. Malls make all kinds of sounds after hours: the settling of an old building, the hum of refrigeration units, the distant echoes of the cleaning crew. But what I began hearing in the food court after closing was different. It sounded like chewing, wet, enthusiastic chewing, like someone really enjoying a meal. It would start faintly, then grow louder, then stop abruptly if I moved toward the source. I mentioned this to my coworker Danny, a community college student like me, who also worked closing shift. "Oh yeah, I've heard that," she said casually, as if we were discussing the mall's background music. It's been happening for years. Some of the old-timers call it the Midnight Muncher. The what? Midnight Muncher. You know, like some ghost that comes out to eat leftovers after hours. She shrugged. It's just one of those mall legends. Every food court probably has one. I laughed it off, but the next time I heard the sound, a distinct smacking of lips, a soft, satisfied groan, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The third strange thing, and the one that really started to freak me out, was the food going missing. Not a lot, not enough to trigger an inventory alarm, but enough to notice. A scoop of orange chicken here, a portion of fried rice there. Food that I knew had been left in the warming trays at closing would be gone by morning, with no explanation from the opening crew. Probably mice, Marcus said when I brought it up during a staff meeting. Mall's got a rodent problem. Maintenance is working on it, but I'd worked in enough restaurants to know what rodent damage looks like.
This wasn't that. This was orderly, precise, like someone was serving themselves a proper meal.
I started paying closer attention, documenting exactly what was left over each night and comparing it to what was there in the morning. The pattern was peculiar. Whatever was taking the thaw, it seemed to have preferences. It always took the orange chicken if any was available. It never touched the vegetable stir-fry. And it had a particular fondness for the sweet and sour pork.
Maybe it's the security guards, Danny suggested one night as we were cleaning up.
I bet they get hungry during their shifts. That made sense, and I felt relieved to have a rational explanation. The next time I saw Hector, one of the regular night guards, I casually asked if he ever helped himself to food court leftovers. His reaction was unexpected. He went pale, his hand moving instinctively to the taser at his belt.
No, he said firmly.
Against policy, we don't touch anything in the vendor stalls, even if it's just going to be thrown out anyway. I pressed. Especially then, he said. Look, word of advice, don't leave anything out overnight. Pack it all away, locked up tight, and try to be gone before the lights go down. The lights go down. I thought the maintenance crew needed light to clean. Hector glanced around nervously. They do their rounds before the power save kicks in. After 11, whole sections of the mall go dark to save electricity. Food court's one of them. I frowned, but I've been here past 11 plenty of times. The lights have always been on. That's because I've been manually overriding the system when I know you're working late, he admitted. I don't like the idea of anyone being in the dark sections. Not after, he trailed off. After what? Hector looked uncomfortable. Nothing. Just be out by 11. Okay? Or make sure you're with someone. I wanted to press him further, but he was already walking away, his walkie-talkie crackling with static. After that conversation, I made a point of being out of the mall by 11 p.m. Even if it meant rushing through my closing duties. This worked fine for a few weeks, until the night of the blizzard. It was a Friday in January, and the weather forecast had been calling for heavy snow. The mall had been practically deserted all day as people stayed home, preparing for the storm. By 7 p.m., management had announced an early closing. 8 p.m. instead of the usual 10 p.m. for Fridays. Most of the food court vendors began shutting down immediately, not wanting to get trapped by the weather. Marcus, however, insisted we stay open until the official food court closing time of policy is policy, he said stubbornly. What if someone wants orange chicken? Who's going to want orange chicken in the middle of a blizzard? I argued. The mall is empty, he waved dismissively. I have to run some errands before the roads get bad. Just close up at 7:30 and make sure everything's prepped for Sunday. The mall was closed on Saturdays, one of the many cost-cutting measures implemented as foot traffic declined. So I found myself alone in the food court at 7:30. Not another soul in sight, the distant sound of the blizzard growing louder as it intensified outside. I began my closing routine, trying to work quickly. The sooner I finished, the sooner I could begin the treacherous drive home. As I was cleaning the warming trays, I realized we had an unusual amount of food left over. Normally, we'd package it for employees to take home. But with everyone gone, there was no one to claim it. I considered taking some myself. But the thought of eating wok this way food voluntarily made my stomach turn. So I left it in the trays, figuring I'd deal with it Sunday. I was just about to leave when the mall's lights flickered ominously. Once, twice, then stabilized. Power outages were common during storms, but the mall had backup generators that usually kicked in immediately. I hurried to finish up, anxious to get on the road before conditions worsened. That's when I heard it. The sound of a food court tray sliding across a table. I froze, straining to listen. The food court was dimly lit now. Many of the overhead lights already switched to night mode. The seating area, a vast expanse of tables and chairs, was lost in shadow. Only the central area near the vendors visible. There it was again, the distinct sound of plastic on laminate, followed by the soft creak of a chair. "Hello?" I called out. "We're closed." No response, just another soft scraping sound. I reached for my phone, intending to use its flashlight. But my battery was nearly dead. I mentally cursed myself for not charging it during my shift. "Maintenance?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "Security?" The scraping stopped. Then came the chewing sound, wet, enthusiastic, unmistakable. It was louder than I'd ever heard it before, not bothering to hide itself now. I felt my skin prickle with goosebumps. Against my better judgment, I stepped out from behind the counter, peering into the dimness of the food court seating area. Most of the tables were in shadow, but there was enough light to make out shapes. Movement caught my eye, a hunched figure at a table in the far corner. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor in my voice. "The mall is closing early due to the storm. You need to leave." The figure didn't respond or turn around. It continued to hunch over the table, its shoulders moving rhythmically as the chewing sounds persisted. Something about its silhouette wasn't quite right, too angular in some places, too fluid in others. The mall lights flickered again, and in that brief flash of darkness, the figure moved, not toward me, thank God, but deeper into the shadows of the food court. When the lights stabilized, I could no longer see it, but I could still hear it. The wet sounds of consumption, now coming from a different direction. My phone chose that moment to die completely. The screen went black, leaving me with no flashlight, no way to call for help. The smart move would have been to leave immediately, to abandon my closing duties and get out while I still could. But curiosity, that fatal human flaw, made me reach instead for the large flashlight we kept under the counter for power outages. I clicked it on. The beam surprisingly strong and swept it across the food court. The tables were empty. I moved the light slowly, methodically, covering every corner, every shadow. Nothing. But the sounds continued, chewing, swallowing, occasionally a soft moan of pleasure. I turned in a slow circle, trying to pinpoint the source. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then I noticed something, a trail on the floor. At first I thought it was just water, perhaps tracked in from the snowy parking lot. But as I directed my flashlight beam closer, I realized it wasn't water. It was too viscous, too dark. It looked like sauce. Sweet and sour sauce, to be specific, with the distinctive orange-red hue we used at wok. This way, the trail led away from our counter and into the darker recesses of the food court, toward the main concourse of the mall. Without fully understanding why, I followed it, the beam of my flashlight bouncing along the tiled floor, illuminating spatter patterns that no human could have made accidentally. The trail led out of the food court and into the main corridor of the mall. By now, all the stores were closed. Metal security gates pulled down like eyelids over darkened interiors. The mall felt different at night. Not just empty, but wrong somehow. As if the familiar space had been subtly altered. As I followed the sauce trail, I noticed it was joined by other substances. Crumbs of fried batter, grains of rice, the occasional piece of chicken. It was as if whatever had been eating was dissolving the food imperfectly, leaving bits of itself behind. The trail led to a service corridor, one of those employees-only passages that honeycomb the hidden infrastructure of any shopping mall. The door was ajar, a smear of sauce on the push bar. I hesitated at the threshold. Following mysterious food trails into dark service corridors during a blizzard was exactly the kind of behavior that gets people killed in horror movies. But I'd worked at Pinwood Mall for 3 years, and I wanted answers. I pushed the door open wider and stepped through. The service corridor was utilitarian. Concrete floors, cinder block walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. Most were off, but every third light remained lit, creating pools of illumination separated by stretches of shadow. The sauce trail continued, now joined by what looked like saliva. Long, viscous strands of it glistened in my flashlight beam. The sound of chewing was louder here, echoing off the hard surfaces. But there was something else too, a kind of wet slithering, like something heavy being dragged across the damp floor. I followed the corridor as it bent to the right, then descended a short flight of stairs. The air grew noticeably cooler, and that smell, the one I'd first noticed months ago, became overpowering. Not just old meat now, but decay, rot, the sweet sour tang of decomposition. The corridor ended at another door, this one labeled maintenance, substructure access. Unlike the previous door, this one was heavy steel, the kind that should have been locked. It stood wide open. Beyond was darkness so complete that my flashlight seemed feeble against. The beam penetrated only a few feet before dissipating, but it was enough to see the edge of what appeared to be a massive circular opening in the floor, like a well or a drainage culvert, but far larger than any mall would reasonably need. The sauce trail led straight to this opening and disappeared over its edge. From the darkness below came the sounds, louder now, more diverse. Not just chewing, but slurping, grinding, the crunch of bones, and underneath it all, a deep, contentedly rhythmic sound that might have been breathing, if breathing could somehow be a chorus rather than a solo. I took a step backward, intending to retreat, when my flashlight caught movement at the edge of the opening. Something was climbing out. It began as what looked like fingers, too many fingers, too long, jointed in all the wrong places, gripping the concrete edge. Then came a limb that might have been an arm if arms could bend in 4 places, and end in what looked like a cluster of small, wet mouths. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the wall. Behind me I heard a sound like dozens of suction cups releasing at once, followed by the wet slap of something heavy hitting the concrete floor. I didn't look back. I ran through the service corridor, back into the main concourse, heading instinctively toward the nearest exit. But as I approached the doors to the parking lot, I realized with horror that they were locked. The automatic security protocol for early closings. The only exit still open would be the main entrance on the opposite side of the mall. I would have to cross the entire length of Pinwood, including passing back through the food court. I paused, listening. The slithering sound was distant but detectable. It was following me, but slowly. I had time. Instead of heading straight for the main entrance, I diverted to the security office near the central court. If anyone was still in the mall, they would be there, and they would have keys to the side exits. The security office was dark as I approached, but I could see the glow of monitors inside. I pounded on the door. Hello? Is anyone there? It's Maya from Walk. This way. No response. I tried the handle locked. Through the window, I could see the security monitors showing grainy feeds from around the mall. Most were empty corridors and closed storefronts, but one caught my attention, the feed from the food court. The quality was poor, but I could clearly see that something was at our counter. Not a person, not anything I could readily identify. It seemed to shift and flow as it moved, a dark mass that extended pseudopods toward the warming trays. As I watched, it pulled itself over the counter with surprising grace and began consuming the leftover food we'd stored for Sunday. On the screen, it turned suddenly as if sensing it was being observed. Although it had no discernible face, it seemed to look directly at the camera. Then it looked toward the corridor that led back to the rest of the mall. Toward me. I backed away from the security office window, my heart hammering. The slithering sound was getting louder now, coming from multiple directions. I was running out of options. The main entrance was still my best bet. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could through the mall, staying close to the storefronts, using their shadows for cover. The storm outside had intensified. I could hear the wind howling against the glass roof of the central court. I was about halfway to the main entrance when the mall's backup generators failed. The remaining lights died with a declining hum, plunging everything into near total darkness. Only the faint, diffused light from the snow-covered skylights provided any illumination. I switched on my flashlight again, but the battery was starting to fade, the beam growing yellower and weaker by the minute. Still, it was enough to navigate by. The slithering sounds were closer now, converging from different directions. Whatever was in the mall with me, there was more than one of them, or it was capable of being in multiple places simultaneously. As I neared the food court again, unavoidable on my path to the main entrance, I noticed that the temperature had dropped dramatically. My breath fogged in front of me. The floor felt sticky beneath my shoes, as if coated with the same substance that had formed the trail I'd followed earlier. I raised my flashlight, and that's when I saw them. There were 3 entities, though they seemed partially connected, like colonies of some bizarre organism. They had taken up positions around the food court, blocking my path to the main entrance. In the weak light, their forms were mercifully indistinct, masses of undulating tissue, modeled in colors that reminded me of the various foods served in the court. Here and there, I could make out what looked like rudimentary mouths, opening and closing spasmodically. They hadn't noticed me yet. They were too busy consuming whatever food had been left out by the other vendors. One of them had engulfed an entire pizza warmer from Slice of Heaven. Another was systematically working its way through the refrigerated sandwich case at Substrat. I stood frozen, uncertain what to do. The main entrance was just beyond the food court, but there was no way to reach it without being seen. My flashlight was dying, the beam now barely strong enough to illuminate a few feet in front of me, and then I heard a familiar voice. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" I spun around to find Marcus standing behind me, his expression serene as he gazed at the monstrosities in the food court. "Marcus, we need to get out of here," I whispered frantically. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, Maya, you don't understand. None of you ever understand at first." "Understand what? What are those things?" "They've been here since before the mall was built," he said softly. "This land, it was special to them. Sacred, you might say. When humans came and built over it, they adapted, found ways to coexist." As he spoke, one of the creatures in the food court turned in our direction. It had no eyes that I could see, but it seemed to sense our presence nonetheless. It made a low, gurgling sound that the others quickly echoed. "They feed," Marcus continued, as if giving an orientation to a new employee, "mostly at night. Mostly on what we leave behind. They prefer cooked food now, though it wasn't always that way. That's why the food court is so important, why I've kept walk this way running all these years." Despite the mall's decline, the creatures were moving toward us now, their movements becoming more purposeful. My flashlight flickered and died completely, leaving only the faint glow from the snow-covered skylights. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Marcus laughed softly. "The same thing any living creature wants: to survive, to thrive, to expand." The entities were close enough now that I could feel their presence. A palpable pressure in the air, accompanied by that stomach-turning smell of decay mingled with fast food. "The storm is perfect," Marcus was saying, his voice taking on an almost reverent quality. No one will question a few disappearances during a blizzard, cars abandoned in snowdrifts, people lost trying to walk home. I started backing away, but found myself against a wall. Marcus reached out and gripped my arm, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. They need fresh food too, Maya, not just leftovers, and in return, they help them all. Haven't you noticed, despite everything, Teamwood survives while other malls die. It adapts, it evolves. The creatures were surrounding us now, their amorphous bodies blocking any escape route. I could feel the cold radiating from them, see the countless mouths opening and closing hungrily. Please, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was pleading with Marcus or the entities themselves. Marcus's grip tightened. I'm sorry it has to be you. I like you, Maya, but the arrangement must be honored. He began pulling me toward the nearest creature. I struggled, but his strength was unnatural, as if something was working through him, lending him power beyond his wiry frame. As the distance closed between me and the mouthful of mouths, I had a sudden desperate idea. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small bottle of hot chili oil I always carried. My one concession to actually eating the food at once. This way, I flipped the cap open, and as Marcus pushed me into the creature's embrace, squirted the entire contents directly into what seemed to be its primary feeding orifice. The reaction was immediate and violent. The creature recoiled with a high-pitched keening sound that hurt my ear. It thrashed wildly, colliding with the others, spreading the burning oil as they made contact. The organized, almost ritualistic atmosphere dissolved into chaos. Marcus's grip loosened as he stared in horror at the creature's distress. I wrenched my arm free and ran, not toward the main entrance, which was still blocked, but toward the service corridor I'd seen the entity emerge from earlier. I had no plan beyond escape, but as I ran back through the darkened mall, I remembered something Hector had mentioned once. The mall had been built on the site of an old drainage system for the surrounding area. The substructure wasn't just for mall maintenance, it connected to the city's stormwater tunnels. If I could reach the opening I'd seen earlier and find a way down that didn't involve being eaten, it might lead to a way out. Behind me, the keening of the creatures had changed to something more ominous, a deep, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to make the very air vibrate. I didn't know what it meant, but I suspected it wasn't good for anything human in the vicinity. I found the service door again and plunged through it, running down the corridor toward the substructure access. The door was still open, the circular opening still yawning into darkness below. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. A maintenance ladder built into the side, descending into the depths. Without giving myself time to reconsider, I swung onto the ladder and began climbing down. The metal rungs were ice cold and slick with that same sauce-like substance, making the descent treacherous. I moved as quickly as I dared, driven by the sounds of pursuit that echoed down from above. The shaft was deeper than I'd expected. I climbed down for what felt like minutes, the light from the open door above growing more distant. Just as my arms were beginning to shake from the strain, my foot touched solid ground. I found myself in what appeared to be an old drainage tunnel, large enough to walk upright in, with a shallow channel of water running down the center. The air was cold and damp, but mercifully free of the rotting food smell that permeated the mall above. I had no light source now, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was a faint illumination coming from somewhere further along the tunnel. A soft greenish glow that made me uneasy but was better than total darkness. I began walking toward it, sloshing through the shallow water. The tunnel curved gradually, and as I rounded the bend, the source of the light came into view. It was a vast chamber, clearly not part of the original drainage system. The walls were covered in a luminescent fungus that provided the greenish glow, and in the center was something I still struggle to describe. A mass, a colony, a mountain of the same shifting, flowing substance I'd seen in the food court, but exponentially larger. It pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a massive heart, and embedded within it, still partially visible, were remnants of the mall's past. Mannequins, cash registers, entire sections of storefronts, and people. So many people, in various stages of absorption. Some looked as if they had been there for decades, only vague human outlines remaining. Others were more recent, their features still distinct, frozen in expressions of terror, or more disturbingly bliss. I recognized some of them, former mall employees who had allegedly moved away, shoppers who had been reported missing over the years. And with a jolt of horror, I saw Hector, the security guard, his body half engulfed, his eyes wide and staring. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. Whatever this was, it was the source, the original entity that had been at Pinwood since before the mall existed. The creatures in the food court were just extensions, appendages of this larger whole. As I retreated, my foot dislodged a small stone, sending it skittering across the floor of the chamber. The sound was tiny, but in the silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. The massive entity stopped pulsing for a moment. Then, slowly, it began to change. Parts of it rose up, forming crude approximations of human figures. Dozens of them, each one moving with jerky, puppet-like motions. Their features were indistinct, but they all turned toward me in unison. One stepped forward. As it came closer, its features resolved into a familiar face. "Maya," it said in Marcus's voice, though the real Marcus was presumably still upstairs. "You should join us, become part of something greater." Other figures stepped forward, each taking on the appearance of someone I'd seen embedded in the mask. They spoke in a disturbing chorus, their voices overlapping. "It doesn't hurt. You'll understand once you're inside. The mall needs fresh blood. We've been waiting for someone like you." They were blocking the way I had come in, but I noticed another tunnel leading away from the chamber. I had no idea where it went, but it was my only option. I turned and ran, splashing through the water channel. Behind me, the chorus of voices turned from cajoling to threatening, and I heard the wet slithering sound of pursuit. The new tunnel was older, clearly predating the mall, with rough stone walls instead of concrete. The water was deeper here, reaching my knees in places, slowing my progress. But I pushed on, driven by the sounds behind me. After what felt like an eternity of running through the dark, always just ahead of my pursuers, I saw a light ahead. Not the sickly green glow, but the blue-white gleam of daylight through snow. The tunnel ended at a large drainage outlet that opened onto the woods behind the mall. The storm had passed during my time underground, leaving behind a transformed world of pristine white. I climbed out, the freezing air burning my lungs but feeling incredibly sweet after the stale atmosphere below. I waded through snow up to my thighs, heading toward where I knew the main road should be. Behind me, I heard splashing from the drainage tunnel. They were still coming, but would they follow me into the open, into the daylight? I got my answer moments later, when I heard the wet slithering sound growing closer. I glanced back to see dark shapes emerging from the tunnel, flowing across the snow with unnatural speed. The sun cast no shadows from them, as if light passed through their substance unimpeded. I stumbled forward, exhaustion beginning to take its toll. The road couldn't be far now, but my legs felt like lead, and my soaked clothes were rapidly freezing in the winter air. Just as I was about to collapse, I heard the blessed sound of an engine cresting a small rise. I saw the county snowplow working its way along the main road. I changed direction, heading straight for it, waving my arms frantically. The driver saw me. I know he did. He slowed briefly, looking at me with confusion. Then his gaze shifted to something behind me, and his expression changed to one I'll never forget. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of resigned recognition. He looked down, pressed the accelerator, and the snowplow continued on its way, leaving me alone. That's when I understood. The entity's influence extended beyond the mall, into the town itself. It had been there too long, had absorbed too many, had become too intertwined with Pinwood's identity. The entire community was complicit, willingly or with no help coming. I changed direction again, heading toward the highway. It was farther away, but it represented my only hope of flagging down someone not from Peenwood, someone beyond the entity's reach. I never made it. The cold slowed me too much, and the things from below were too fast. They surrounded me in a small clearing, forming a circle of roughly humanoid shapes. Marcus, or the thing wearing his appearance, stepped forward. "The mall provides," he said softly, "and the mall must be provided for." They closed in around me, their forms becoming less human as they approached, revealing their true nature, a colony organism of countless mouths and grasping appendages. As I felt the first cold wetness touch my skin, as I smelled that sweet-sour combination of decay and fast food, the strangest thought crossed my mind. At least I would never have to serve orange chicken again.